Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. La Familia Michoacana, also known as La Familia, was a criminal organization originating from the Mexican state of Michoacán. Known for its involvement in drug trafficking and organized crime, La Familia Michoacana has a complex history marked by religious overtones, social influence, and extreme violence. Mexican analysts believe that the roots for La Familia were formed in the 1980s with the stated purpose of bringing order to Michoacán, emphasizing help and protection for the poor. Its initial incarnation, La Familia, formed as a group of vigilantes, spurred to power to counter kidnappers, extorters, and drug dealers, who were their stated enemies. However, by the time the 1990s came around, La Familia began to turn into a full-fledged criminal organization. What many don't realise is that in the early days, La Familia were closely allied to the Gulf Cartel due to the friendship between Golfo boss Osiel Cardenas and La Familia kingpin Carlos Rosales Mendoza. The partnership would be fruitful for a number of years, and with the Gulf Cartel support, La Familia would go on to dominate Michoacán. Los Zetas, who were the armed wing of the Gulf Cartel, were often tasked with training members of La Familia Michoacana. During the late 1990s up until the mid-2000s, La Familia were essentially a subsidiary of the Gulf Cartel. With the support of the Golfos, but especially the Zetas, La Familia managed to kick out the other major cartel in Michoacán state, the Milenio Cartel. The Milenio Cartel at the time containing up-and-coming traffickers such as Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. However, in 2006, La Familia declared its independence from the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas. The group's leaders, particularly Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, known as El Mas Loco, espoused a unique ideology that combined religious and pseudo-philosophical elements within criminal activities. Moreno portrayed the group as the defenders of the people, a narrative that helped La Familia gain local support and to distance themselves from the Zetas, who the local population were getting sick of. La Familia went to war with the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas for the control of Michoacán state, a war which they would actually go on to win. Heading into 2007, La Familia had expelled the Milenio Cartel from the state and had managed to successfully sever ties with the Gulf Cartel, leaving them in a dominant position in Michoacán state. The issue for La Familia was that in 2006, then Mexican President Felipe Calderón announced a crackdown on drug cartels, and his home state of Michoacán would be the main target. The state was flooded with army and law enforcement, and over the years, La Familia began to lose their grip on Michoacán. As the years passed, leaders were either killed or arrested, which eventually led to the cartel becoming disbanded, according to law enforcement. As the original La Familia were beginning to fall apart in the early 2010s, a new group emerged, named La Nueva Familia Michoacana. Despite popular belief, La Nueva seemed to have no affiliation with the original group. They essentially took the name and ran with it. La Nueva are currently one of the most powerful cartels in Michoacán state, and much like the original La Familia Michoacana, they rule with an iron fist and are exceptionally violent. In today's video, we will take a look at some of the most graphic videos released by both La Familia and La Nueva Familia Michoacana. But nevertheless, let's take a journey into the depraved as we explore the true horrors of La Familia. Number 1. Barrett 50 Cal. The following video was released in May of 2020 following the discovery of two bodies in the state of Mexico in the municipality of Soltepec. One of the victims was identified as Adrian Menez Cortez, whose alias was La Hormiga. In regards to the victims, there was actually two videos released, and one actually details the interrogation of La Hormiga. The interrogation video is 2 minutes and 22 seconds in length, and in the clip, you see La Hormiga sitting against a tree with his hands tied behind his back as he answers questions from the person filming. The interrogator's voice has been distorted. In the interrogation, La Hormiga confirms that he works for Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion and that his base of operations is in the city of Toluca. He says he works for a man simply named Junior or JR, and that he is paid 5,000 pesos bi-weekly, which is roughly $272 every 2 weeks. He also states that his boss lives in the municipality of Lerma. Despite the dire situation, La Hormiga holds it together pretty well during the interrogation. He tries his best to show no fear, while seemingly being honest with his answers. The second video, containing the executions, is just over 5 minutes in length. The video is shot in the countryside on a dirt road during daylight hours. In the video, you see La Hormiga along with another man standing next to each other in the middle of the road. Both have had their hands tied behind their backs, and their feet are also tied together with rope. La Hormiga is interrogated again, going over pretty much the same details as he did in the original interrogation video. The two captives are surrounded by La Nueva Familia cartel members, and you hear a lot of radio chatter in the background. One of the sicarios is carrying an assault rifle, while the other is carrying a sniper rifle. It looks like a Barrett 50 cal, but I'm not sure. Unlike the first interrogation, La Hormiga seems much more panicked this time around. He's struggling to get his words out as he is asked questions. The interrogation itself lasts around 1 minute. Once the interrogation is done, the captives remain in the middle of the road, standing on the spot while all the sicarios back up. They back up to about 25 feet and then stop. The sniper rifle is then placed on the ground with a bipod, and a sicario goes prone, taking control of the sniper. He then aims at La Hormiga and pulls the trigger. He purposely shoots him in the leg, and it instantly drops him. La Hormiga doesn't make a single sound. The sicario then shoots the second captive, once again in the leg, which instantly drops him. However, the second victim lets out horrific pain-induced screams. He shouts "Por favor, no," which makes the sicarios laugh. The second victim's screams are extremely loud as both men writhe around on the ground in pain, before a third shot is then fired. It's hard to see whether it connected, but I think it hit La Hormiga in the leg again. The sicarios then shout instructions at the captives, but they don't respond. Two sicarios who are carrying assault rifles then walk over to the two captives, and they make them kneel on the ground, and they make sure they are kneeling right next to each other. The sicarios then walk back behind the sniper. The hitman with the rifle then shoots 2 more times, this time hitting kill shots on both victims. After each shot, they both instantly drop. The sicario and the person filming then walk over to the now deceased victims. The unnamed captive was hit in the throat, possibly with the bullet hitting his spine. You hear the air still leaving his body, and you hear the blood gurgling in his throat. La Hormiga appears to have been hit in the head, though it is hard to tell. It almost looks as if the bullet has exited out his ear. You actually see La Hormiga still breathing, though this is probably a phenomenon called agonal breathing. Upon the video's release, the clip went somewhat viral on Spanish-speaking sites due to the weaponry used. I don't usually cover shooting videos, but many have asked me to cover this clip previously. In regards to the weapon used, there is some debate, and I'm certainly not an expert on guns. Most sources seem to suggest that the rifle was a Barrett sniper, but I would have assumed if that was the case, the damage caused by the bullets would have been far worse. Maybe the type of ammo used has something to do with that. If anyone could enlighten me in the comments, it would be appreciated. Number 2. Make him suffer. In 2023, many graphic videos were released by a variety of different drug cartels in Mexico, all displaying levels of brutality unimaginable to many of us. Of course, the infamous Zacatecas flaying video released by Cartel del Noreste stole the headlines and was a hot topic on social media, which may have taken attention away from other shocking videos. One, in which was released in April of 2023, despite its barbarism, never garnered much attention online. I covered the horrific clip at the time of its release. However, just after making the video, a second clip related to the case was released, essentially giving an extended version of the original clip. The videos in question were released by La Nueva Familia, and the brutal execution seemingly took place in the state of Guerrero. Guerrero for many years has been a hotbed for cartel activity, with various factions operating in the state and fighting each other for power. To name a few, CJNG, Los Viagras, La Nueva Familia Michoacana, Los Tlacos and Guerreros Unidos all operate in Guerrero State, leading to a hellscape that is akin to a free-for-all. Not one cartel dominates Guerrero, which has led to more violence due to the constant fighting. In regards to the clips in question, it's unclear as to which cartel the victim belonged to, though La Nueva have been fighting the likes of Cartel Jalisco and Los Tlacos in the area, so potentially the victim may have been affiliated with one of those organizations. The video was first uploaded online by a now suspended Twitter account named El Blog de los Gua 1. Aside from that, there is next to no backstory behind the clips. It's also worth noting that the clips are not filmed in the usual way in which cartel videos are usually filmed. For the most part, cartel execution videos are set up for the camera, so to speak. There is often an interrogation segment, followed by an execution, and then ended with some sort of closing statements. These clips in question were recorded by one of the sicarios in the crowd, seemingly off his own back, which makes the clips a lot more obscured to a certain degree. The first clip is exactly 22 seconds in length. The video has been shot in a forest during daylight hours. As you play the video, you are met with utter carnage, both visually and audibly. You hear the sicarios, of which there are many, too many to count, screech, holler and cheer as you hear horrific screams in the background. Initially, it's hard to make out what is going on, but you soon see a downed captive and he is surrounded by multiple armed sicarios who are wearing combat fatigue. Around 4 to 5 sicarios are holding down the victim, who is doing his very best to break free. However, he is overpowered. The victim's face is red, covered with blood. You see a sicario kneel over the captive, and he is jamming a knife into the man's stomach, stabbing and slicing back and forth in a maniacal fashion. You hear the victim scream incredibly loud, so much so his voice cracks, turning the screams from deep and guttural to extremely high-pitched. Once the man's abdominal area has been cut open, several sicarios then ravage the poor man. They cheer and laugh as the man's screams get louder and louder, and one shouts, "Make him suffer," and it then becomes apparent as to what these sicarios are doing. The man who cut him open is then ripping the victim's guts out by hand, pulling several feet of the man's intestines out of his body. The victim continues to scream and writhe in pain on the ground as the sicarios just laugh. One sicario hits the victim in the face with the barrel of his gun while others cuss him out. It's horrific. A second video was also released, shortly after the publication of the first clip. The second video is 29 seconds, and unlike the first, has been dubbed with a narco corrido song. In the second video, you continue to see the man writhe on the ground in pain, and you also see the man's severed entrails littered across the dirt floor, as one sicario even stands on them. Several feet of intestines hang out the man's body as he continues to try to fight for his life, to no avail. A man with a combat knife is wrestling with the victim until he is able to subdue him, subsequently cutting the man's throat with the blade. In the second video, you get a good idea of how many sicarios there are at the scene, and I'd estimate there to be at least 25. The second clip is even more obscure than the first, but at the end you see the sicario cutting the man's throat, attempting to behead him. The man's face is also completely red, covered in blood, as shown in the first clip. I am not entirely sure, but it may be possible that the victim's face was flayed, or at least partially flayed. Due to the quality of the video, it's hard to tell. Regardless, the two clips, especially the first, are incredibly graphic, and the screams are among the worst I've heard in any cartel video. This one isn't for the faint of heart. Number 3. A dagger to the heart. The following clip is a relatively unknown but extremely brutal video released by La Familia Michoacana in and around May of 2020. In the video, 2 captives are ruthlessly murdered by La Familia sicarios for allegedly working for CJNG, one of La Familia's biggest rivals. Truth be told, during 2019 to 2020, the violence between the two criminal factions was at a fever pitch, as around this time, Cartel Jalisco tried to flood the state of Michoacán with sicarios in an attempt to take over territory. Michoacán has long been a target for Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación due to its strategic drug corridors as well as its natural resources and bountiful land. To this day, Cartel Jalisco are still attempting to gain more control and influence in Michoacán, however, they have struggled to get a foothold in the area. Local cartels, such as Carteles Unidos and La Familia, have met them with extreme violence, and this video perfectly encapsulates that reality. The video itself is a longer one, at 6 minutes in length, and the setting is that of a desolate rural area believed to be in the Tierra Caliente region of Michoacán. The clip has been filmed at the dead of night. As you play the video, you are met with the disturbing sight of one of the captives sitting on the ground with his hands tied up. His pants have been stripped and his shirt has been unbuttoned. He is also wearing a CJNG branded hat. A sicario stands menacingly next to him as he carries only what can be described as a long dagger. The sicario reads out a statement spewing the usual cartel rhetoric. He calls out CJNG for their bad behaviour and vows to kill any of them that he comes across. He also accuses the captives of being members of Cartel Jalisco. As the statement is being read out, the camera pans around and you see another captive, sitting with his back to the camera with his hands tied up. It's worth noting that the first captive seems to be out of it. He appears to have been drugged. The sicario pledges allegiance to La Familia Michoacana before then turning his attention to the first victim. He takes the dagger and bends down next to the captive before plunging the blade into the victim's heart area. The hitman plunges the blade into the man's chest several times before he then once again stabs the blade into the heart area, and he then proceeds to cut vertically, creating a small cavity. Despite stabbing the man in the heart, there isn't much blood, which once again leads me to believe that the victim is heavily drugged. The sicario then calls out various members of CJNG as well as insulting cartel boss El Mencho as the camera focuses on the victim. The captive is still alive, though he doesn't speak nor scream once. All you hear is his breathing, which becomes increasingly louder and louder. It sounds as if he is hyperventilating. A second sicario then enters shot, who is also carrying a knife, and he then tries to decapitate the victim, but he makes a mess of it, which only prolongs the victim's suffering. He takes the combat knife and stabs it into the side of the captive's neck. He then attempts to pull the blade up to essentially cut through the man's windpipe. The victim squirms around on the ground, all while making no sounds whatsoever. The sicario then tries all manners of techniques to behead the man. In one instance, he tries to stab through the spinal cord with a knife, but he fails. After cutting through the man's windpipe, he eventually lines the blade up with the spinal cord. He then tries to stamp on the blade to cut through the bone, which again doesn't work. The victim is a bloody mess at this point, and you still hear the faint sounds of laboured breathing mixed with wheezing noises. Eventually, the sicarios give up, and they just let the man bleed out, which he does. They then move on to the second victim, who is sitting on the ground, just waiting for his turn. He is shirtless and also appears to have been drugged. However, possibly his dosage was not as strong, as he is much more lucid than the first victim. The sicario who stabbed the first victim in the heart then orders the second captive to lay down on his back, which he does. A second hitman then enters the scene with a knife in hand, and immediately he stabs the knife into the man's heart, much like with the first victim. However, this time, blood erupts from the wound, and almost immediately, the blood completely covers the victim's chest. The sicario then stabs and cuts a vertical line down the captive's chest. He stabs the man repeatedly in the chest and neck, which makes the victim cry out in pain. However, he sounds very lethargic in his reactions, so again, I'm assuming he was drugged. The sicario just continues to stab away in a maniacal fashion. He severs the windpipe once again by stabbing behind it and then cutting upwards. Once again, however, he cannot cut through the spinal cord, so he essentially cuts through all the flesh around it. The only thing holding the man's head onto his body is the spine. The murder of the second victim is much more bloody. Throughout both executions, the sicarios can be heard laughing, as well as cussing out CJNG boss El Mencho. The two victims were alleged to have been sicarios. But anyway, that is the video. A quick run through of some of the worst videos released by La Familia Michoacana. I could have also included the pitbull castration video in this list, however, although it is attributed to La Familia, I've never found any official confirmation that that is actually the case, so I decided to leave that video off this list, plus I've spoken about it a lot anyway. And also, Funky Town is very often attributed to La Familia, though again, there's no evidence for that, so that is also not included on this video. But anyway, as always guys, thank you for the support, it's much appreciated. Any topic recommendations, please feel free to follow me on Twitter. The link will be in the pinned comment, as will the link to my Twitch, etc. And yeah, as always guys, stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.